Engagement beta counts on social media will have you believe that 40% of players who entered the transfer portal are still uncommitted. And folks, that is just blatantly not true.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. The dog days of summer, the sports, they're not sportsing like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all their customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, folks, Gonzaga's schedule is almost all at neutral sites. We're going to talk about why that is, whether Baylor is going to be Gonzaga's first game as we wait for that to get finalized, plus the rapid rise of NIL figures in college basketball, what it means for Gonzaga, what it means for the sport in general, all that coming up on today's show. But we're going to start talking about engagement farm Twitter accounts, which is not exactly an area that I think I expected to have a lot of conversation about, nor something that I would particularly take seriously. But, and for those of you who are on social media, you know what I'm talking about as an explanation. It's just people who their goal is to get as much engagement as they can, trying to get responses, trying to get reactions, etc. So these accounts like Clutch Points has them, and there's various other like NBA University, like whatever it may be, those kinds of accounts. They like to promote either misinformation or misleading information or things of that ilk. Everybody knows that the modern world and social media has created a influx of misinformation. It's an epidemic well outside of just sports. We're not going to dig into all of that. But what I want to talk about is a stat that this was a big thing that came up last year when the transfer portal was kind of first. Last year wasn't the first year of the transfer portal, was the first like really big year of the transfer portal. And this data went around a bunch last year. It's going around making the rounds once again this year, implying that 40% of players, Division I basketball players who entered the transfer portal, are not currently committed to a new school. And the reason that this data comes out, and they're using sources that make it seem like this data is accurate. And so I understand they're not really directly lying, but what it is doing, and the intention, besides gaining engagement, which is obviously the number one intention, but the intention behind kind of spilling this information and framing it the way that it is being framed is to kind of make the transfer portal, or continue to make the transfer portal, this kind of boogeyman scenario where people point to the transfer portal as what is wrong with college sports. Players can go wherever they want. They can transfer freely. There's no loyalty to your team. There's no player development anymore. It is what is wrong with college sports. The same arguments are used for NIL. And we're going to talk about NIL in the second segment of the show in a bit of a different context, but it's basically a way to discourage player autonomy. If you are a longtime listener to the show, even if you're a relatively new listener to the show, you probably know I am strongly in favor of student athletes having more freedom over their decisions in terms of where to play, what school to attend, freedom to transfer more freely, freedom to make money. I'm on board with all of that. I think restricting NIL and restricting the transfer portal as college athletics operated for literally centuries was bad. And it's better now that we have opened up those freedoms. There still needs to be regulations in both accounts. And we're obviously a ways away from figuring out what that looks like. And again, we'll get into more of that on the NIL side in the second segment of the show. But from a transfer portal perspective, they've shortened the window this year. They prevented grad transfers from entering the portal whenever they wanted. Some of the issues we saw last summer, like players committing and entering the portal in like August, those issues have kind of gone away. But this kind of is a scenario where we're trying to get people riled up about players hitting the transfer portal and leaving, and by saying, hey, look, all these players entered the portal and now they're homeless. They lost their scholarship. They're not going to graduate now because they're on their fifth school in 4 years, or whatever kind of like angry Facebook comments that you might see from this kind of thing. Those are what they're trying to engage and rile up that particular base of people. Here's the thing. The data is not accurate for a litany of reasons. Players who enter the transfer portal and return back to their same school, in many situations, are still left as vacant or open in the transfer portal. And the data that they're pulling from is usually from like verbal commits or various other D1 tracker type websites that are tracking this kind of information. Those sites are set up to track Division I basketball transfers. So players who enter the transfer portal and end up going to a Division II or a Division III or an NAIA or a junior college, those players are going to be left in the transfer portal as uncommitted because they did not go to another Division I school. That, however, does not mean that they are uncommitted, and the data does not represent that faction of student athlete. Again, if you were to read this data and you were to interpret it the way that the people who are posting it want you to interpret it, you would see that 40% of players are, again, just like stuck in no man's land and gave up the opportunity to continue to play college basketball because they thought the grass was greener. That is what it is trying to get you to say. And the fact that many of these players did find a home, it just isn't a Division I home, is part of the reason that I think this data, I know that this data is misleading. Will Graves is a great example. A couple of years ago, Will Graves hit the transfer portal. I think he looked for Division I offers. I suspect anybody would, but ultimately he went to Southern Oregon, Division III school, played close to his family, got an opportunity to play, which he didn't do at Gonzaga as a walk-on for multiple years. That wouldn't count. He would be part of that 40%. That to me just feels wrong and misleading. Also, guys who are hoping for eligibility and won't get it. This is a common one. We saw two very recent commits in the transfer portal. Both Kansas and North Carolina landed players recently because those players entered the transfer portal way back in April, but they were waiting to see if the NCAA was going to grant them an extra year of eligibility via the waiver process. David Coit got an extra year of eligibility. He committed to Kansas. Tijan Claude got an extra year of eligibility. He committed to North Carolina. Both those things happened like a week ago. There are other players still waiting for waivers. Some of them will get denied, and then they will be done with their college basketball career. Some of them will get approved, and they will end up going somewhere else at the Division I level. But right now, they are being represented as players who are in the portal who never found a new home, the woe is me crowd type of thing. And that's not the situation that they're in. It's not. You also have walk-ons who enter the portal. I already used Will Graves as an example, but let's talk about Colby Brooks. In fact, let's talk about the three Gonzaga players who entered the transfer portal this offseason, because it is a perfect representation. You could put up a data point right now if you're using verbal commits or other websites like that. I'm not picking on those sites. They do a phenomenal job. But if you were to look at most of those sites right now, and you were to look at the three players who entered the transfer portal out of Gonzaga, you could put up a graphic that says 66% of the players who left Gonzaga this offseason did not find a new home, are still in the transfer portal. And that data is incredibly misleading. Obviously, with small sample sizes, it's always going to look a little different. But here's the thing. One of those players, Pavle Stosic, did land at the Division I level. He, of course, transferred to Utah State. That's where he's going to play next year. One of them, Luka Krajnovic, went home. He's going to play professionally in Croatia next year. That's not a failure of the transfer portal. That's not he's listed. He's part of that 40%. Assuming I know which websites they're using to track this data, Luka Krajnovic shows up as being uncommitted in the transfer portal. He's not. He's playing professionally overseas. Colby Brooks counts as being part of the uncommitted in the transfer portal. And as far as I know, he is. As far as I know, that is accurate to Colby Brooks' situation. But again, Colby Brooks is two things. One, he was a walk-on. So this kind of, nebulous, these players are giving up their scholarships. He didn't have one in the first place. He wasn't on scholarship, so he didn't walk away from a scholarship to enter the transfer portal. He was, in fact, looking for a scholarship to close out his college basketball career. And two, Colby Brooks graduated. So again, if the people who are getting riled up about this, these guys are walking away from scholarships and they're not graduating, neither of those are true for Colby Brooks. And he is one of many players in that situation who is in the transfer portal. I don't know if Colby Brooks is going to play Division I basketball next year. I don't know if he's going to play college basketball next year. I follow him on Instagram. I'm trying to find out if he does end up somewhere next year, because I think it'd be a fun story, especially if he's at the D1 level. We know he got some interest early in the offseason from places like Cal State Fullerton and Cal Poly and Denver and Portland State. I'm guessing most of those rosters are probably finalized. But here's the other part of this. There's probably players who are committed, who do have new schools, even at the Division I level, who are being listed as still uncommitted because they never made an announcement. Most rosters are not set right now. You go look at Gonzaga's roster, the 2024-25 roster, it's there. But if you were to do this for every Division I school, not all of them are there. Not even most of them are there. So there's going to be, I'll use Portland State as an example. Maybe Portland State throws their roster up tomorrow and Colby Brooks is on it. Suddenly, he's no longer part of that group. But he didn't make an announcement. Portland State didn't make an announcement. Not everybody does that. Most players do, but not everybody does. So I bring all of this up because I think it is important. It's important in general to recognize misinformation and be able to handle that. That's a huge societal issue. Again, not going to dig all the way to the weeds on that. But in terms of college basketball, it is these kind of accounts and these conversations and these stats that you're seeing are designed to make people feel anti-transfer portal and in turn anti-student athlete autonomy. It's kind of, you want to blame the student athletes. Look at all these kids who were given bad advice. That's a common thing that you'll see these people say. They were given bad advice or they were given too much freedom and they made a dumb decision and now they lost their scholarship. Now they're not going to graduate. Now these bad things are going to happen. And the fact that it's 40%, almost half of the players who entered the transfer portal just got left out in the dust. Like, thinking rationally, that just cannot be true. Thousands of players entered the transfer portal. You want to tell me that almost half of them, that 800, 900 kids entering the transfer portal are just still waiting for a new place to play? That, thinking about that, it's just insanely obvious that that's not true. So I think I want to bring this up because I see it all the time and I see people engage with it and I see this conversation coming just back and forth, and it's just, it's not realistic information. It is very misleading. There are tons. I mean, there's guys with legal issues that we see. I've seen names where I'm like, oh, that guy got arrested. That, he's not playing because nobody's going to pick him up. And like, that still counts. And I guess in theory that should count in this data, but it's like, there's a lot of factors that are not being counted when this data is being evaluated. And it's really misleading. And I think important for fans of college basketball to acknowledge and recognize and kind of be able to differentiate, because I think that it's bad for the sport if a bunch of people continue to think that player freedom and player autonomy and the transfer portal in general are just these huge, gigantic warts on the sport, because they're not going anywhere. Just like the transfer portal is not going anywhere, folks, neither is NIL. And that's kind of what I want to talk about here, because over three-fourths of power conference coaches have had a player ask for $1 million or more in cash for NIL. The numbers are just getting higher and higher. We're going to talk about what that means for Gonzaga and across the college basketball landscape coming up in just a second. But first, folks, I want to tell you about Ibotta. The summer is almost over, and a lot of folks are taking those dream end of the summer vacations, but they're dreading the cost. And with Ibotta, you get cash back on every single purchase you make, so you can spend more time making memories this summer and less time dreaming about them. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. You can earn on hundreds of different items, from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or a fancy dinner that you and your friends have been craving. It's time you join the over 50 million users who use Ibotta to earn cash back every time they shop. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying the app by using code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the Apple App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back using code LOCKEDONCollege. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or Apple App Store using code LOCKEDONCollege. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from our conversation about the transfer portal and how it is being used as kind of a boogeyman of sorts to get people riled up about college athletics in their current state, to talk about NIL, which is the other major factor that gets people riled up and can kind of cause a lot of the same angst and emotional reaction that we saw and talked about in the transfer portal conversation. But here's where we're going to go with this NIL conversation. For those of you who listened to the show last week, we discussed the Candid Coaches series, which is a series of articles written by Matt Norlander and Gary Parrish, who are both at CBS Sports. They also both host the Eye on College Basketball podcast. And they do this series every year where they interview 100 plus Division I college basketball coaches. They ask them 10 different questions. They post the results of each question into a different article on CBS Sports. This is not the first time we're referencing it this summer, and it probably will not be the last time that we reference it this summer, because it is a valuable resource for kind of the state of college basketball, what college coaches are thinking, what they're talking about, their projections for the season, various other things as well. And lately, or most recently, I should say, the question posed to the coaches and written about by Norlander and Parrish on CBS is this: what is the most amount of NIL money somebody asks you or your staff to pay a player? It's fun, right? We're going to get into the data here in a second. And I want to make sure that this is important clarification, because for most of the questions, the fact that they have a wide range of coaches, from Division I high major head coaches, coaches who are ranked in the top 10 or are going to be ranked in the top 10 this season, to assistant coaches at low major schools, assistant coaches at schools in the MEAC or the Ohio Valley or the WAC, those kind of coaches. So the spectrum is incredibly wide. And for a question like this, that matters a lot. The overall data for the 100 plus coaches asked, 2 million or more, 10.4% of coaches said they have been asked for 2 million or more for a specific player in NIL. 40.6% of these coaches said 1 to 2 million is the highest ask they have seen. And then 49%, so almost exactly half of the coaches who answered this question, said that the highest amount they've been asked about is less than $1 million. Here's where this data gets a lot more interesting. 77% of Power 5 coaches who were part of this survey, 77%, more than 3/4, said at least 1 million. 77%. Meanwhile, of the 49% of coaches interviewed who said less than 1 million, 75% of them are not from the Power 5. So basically, for all intents and purposes here, when looking at this data, 3/4 of Power 5 coaches have been asked for $1 million or more. Most of the coaches who are not Power 5 coaches have not been asked about $1 million. And it kind of, as the way they wrote it in the article, it kind of shows that there's a divide. There's a divide between the high major programs and the low major programs. The high major programs are playing with massive budgets, millions of dollars dedicated just to their men's basketball program. Players are asking for millions of dollars. Players are, in some cases, getting millions of dollars, or even if it's not that, they're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars. Whereas at the low major level, the vast majority of coaches are not even hearing figures at that level. In fact, Parrish wrote in the article that a lot of these coaches aren't hearing figures in the $100,000 range. And I can tell you, with some of the programs that I have familiarity with, not Gonzaga, other programs that I have familiarity with, they wouldn't even, 100,000 is an completely insurmountable number in terms of being able to give to a single player, potentially an entire program from an NIL perspective. It's not money that the majority of Division I college basketball programs even remotely have. And I think that's generally known. I don't think that's like a big shocking piece of information, but it's important. And I think the Gonzaga audience in particular, you folks, probably more connected to that because the teams in the conference are, it's not a power conference. Many of the teams Gonzaga competes against are not even sniffing $100K per player or $100K maybe in the entire budget for NIL. So we kind of are more familiar with that. The numbers have increased, and I think that's the important part. Yes, the divide between between high major and low major has continued to increase, but the overall asks have increased just across college basketball. And in fact, a quote that was, again, all of this was anonymous, so we don't know any of the coaches who were interviewed, but this quote was in the article. I'm just going to read it directly here. It says, "The same player who got $50,000 a few years ago is now getting $200,000, and the player who got $200,000 a few years ago is probably asking for $1 million, and they might be getting it. I used to have a good NIL package, about $2.5 million. That used to be good, but it's nothing now compared to some SEC and Big 12 schools. I swear some schools are spending $6 or $7 million in the transfer portal. We can't do that at my place, but that's about what it takes now." So the other detail here that is important to acknowledge is this question is very specifically asking the highest amount of money that a coach has been asked about. It is not how much they have paid. And many of the quotes and many of the conversations that Parrish and Norlander had, or at least what they presented in the article, are that the kids are asking for way more money than they are going to get paid, than the schools have to offer. And I bring this up because I think that these two things go hand in hand. And frankly, it goes a little bit hand in hand with our first conversation. How the media, how things are portrayed on social media by the national media matters. if every conversation is about how Great Osborne got $2 million, how Coleman Hawkins got $2 million, how Umar Ballo asked for $1.5 million, whatever, we don't know. We can't confirm that this data is true. I mean, there's sources saying, yeah, Great Osborne got 2 million, but like there's no checks and balances to confirm that that's true. And especially when the report is like Coleman Hawkins asked for this, Umar Ballo asked for this, so-and-so player asked for this, and we never actually hear a figure. It's important. Again, it's misinformation. It's leading players who are not at that level, who are not some of the 10 or 15 best transfers in the entire class, are asking for obscene amounts of money that they're never going to get. And in fact, there was an example, a coach said that a player who averaged about 5 points a game at the mid-major level asked their program for $400,000. And they just the exact quote in the article, the coach said, my jaw is still dropped. Like they're just stunned that these are the kind of asks that these coaches are, or that these players are making, or that their agents are making. And it goes back to, again, there's no clarity. I've been an advocate that contracts in general should come to college athletics, and I think that they will. You can sign a 1-year deal, a 2-year deal, a 3-year deal, up to a 4-year deal. Your scholarship's tied to your contract, and the money's public. And we're a long ways away from that, unfortunately. But I think that's what it has to come to. Every other professional sport, and yes, at this point, college athletics are professional sports, their contracts are public. There's a salary cap. It is a process that is not secretive and hidden and misleading and confusing the way that college athletics are. And I think the reason, and again, it was laid out nicely in the article, was like for 98% of college athletics history, paying players is the worst thing you could do as a coach. And now it is a fundamental part of your job. And that is an insane change. Thinking about it, just kind of stepping back, many of you have been college basketball fans for at least 5 years, many of you 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25, etc. For the vast majority of the time you followed the sport, paying players was the worst thing you could hear about your program. And now we're trying to, it's critical. It's important. Every time a player doesn't pick your school, it's, they got more money somewhere else. And it's like, for coaches who've been in this business for a long time, that's such a dramatic and sudden change. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that clarity and more access to information is good, but because paying players has been so taboo for decades, centuries, we're not all of a sudden going to just start publicizing it. And I understand the hesitation, but it's a net negative. High school players don't know how much money they should ask for because there's not any public information on this is what top 10 recruits are getting. This is what, and there's certain programs are, if Kentucky and Arkansas and, Alabama are interested in you, you're probably going to get a bunch more money. But if Villanova and Creighton and Gonzaga are interested in you, those are all great programs. They're all going to be ranked similarly, but you're maybe not going to get as much money because you can't drive up the price at the same level. Does that mean you're a worse basketball player? No, but it means trying to figure out how much money you're worth and how much you should ask for is really difficult. And it's already difficult to pick a school. It's already difficult to transfer and be planning to do this and move your family around or move your life around or things like that. And then to try to figure out, well, how much should I ask for? What am I worth? Why is it so much different at this school than this school? It's really messy right now. And I think more public information. And I know a lot of people say, it's not my business how much these kids make, but and maybe it doesn't need to be public to us, just regular casual fans, but there needs to be some structure to this that there isn't currently. And this article and the anonymous quotes from the coaches kind of really laid it out in a lot of ways. I want to talk quickly about what this means for Gonzaga. If we're talking about there being a divide between the high major and the low major, Gonzaga's on the high major side. I'm not going to get into the whole, is Gonzaga a mid-major argument? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But in terms of this conversation, Gonzaga has money. I guarantee you, I don't know if Gonzaga staffer was part of this interview or not, but I guarantee you they've been approached about $1 million or more for students. I don't know if they've paid $1 million for a specific player or not. My gut says no, but I don't know. But I'd be stunned if they hadn't been asked about it, because we know some of the names, or at least we have guesses on some of the names that they've potentially pursued in the transfer portal. And we know that some of those players asked for that amount of money and in some cases got that amount of money. Gonzaga landed key transfers this offseason. They landed Michael Ajayi, who's on NBA draft boards. They landed Caleb Battle, who finished the year averaging 30 a game in the SEC. You think those guys didn't get offered big money? Yeah, I guarantee you they did. Ajayi's a little bit more interesting because he committed so early. But yeah, those guys got offered big money. Where I think it's impacting Gonzaga more is not in the transfer portal. It's more so in the high school recruiting. And I don't think it's a lack of money for Gonzaga. I have not really been given any strong indication that Gonzaga is unable to keep up financially in the NIL era. People thought that last year and kind of panicked a little bit, but then they went out and had this amazing offseason, and now that panic's kind of gone. But I do think from a high school recruiting perspective, we've seen Gonzaga miss out on some five-star talent that they pursued in the past. This has happened every year for 25 years, so I don't think that it suddenly is NIL driven necessarily. People wanted to say Zoom got a lot of money from UW and he wasn't getting that at Gonzaga. And I think that a lot of people equate that with Gonzaga doesn't have the same money as UW. And that may be true, but also Gonzaga just probably wasn't willing to pay. There's a big difference between not having the funds to pay the kids that you want to bring into your program or having a line, having a balance of this is the amount of money I'm willing to pay. And so asked for more. So that's it. And I think that's probably more likely the case. Whereas Gonzaga is, currently in pursuit of Nick Kamenia, they're currently in pursuit of Isaiah Harwell, they're in pursuit of Kingston Flemings. Like, there's a chance that they'll get priced out of those guys. And I don't think it's because they can't afford it. I think it's because Mark Few would rather spend the NIL money that they have on players who are veterans, on transfers, on their own players, keeping guys in the program. Again, Gonzaga kept all of their key talent. NIL played a role in that. That's not being talked about all that much, but it played a role. I don't know what those kids went back to, the kids who are currently on the team went back to Gonzaga and said, hey, I'll stay if you offer me this. Those conversations happened. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that Mark Few and Gonzaga prioritize keeping their kids in-house. And that means that maybe they're not going to be able to throw as much money as a high school player. Maybe that means they don't get the five-star talent. Guess what? Gonzaga hasn't gotten five-star talent for the majority of Mark Few's tenure as the head coach. And I'm not complaining about the results. So yeah, maybe they do miss out on these guys. Maybe they don't. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with Kamenia and Harwell and those guys necessarily. But if they are missing out on players and it is NIL focused, I think that we should reframe that as it doesn't necessarily mean that Gonzaga can't afford five-star players because they're getting high-profile players in the portal. It means that they're choosing not to spend their money on those freshmen. And I think that's, again, we don't have concrete proof that that's true, but that's kind of my read on the situation based on what I know about Mark Few, what I know about Gonzaga in general. And so I think that is an important kind of context point to have going forward in these transfer portal and NIL conversations for Gonzaga, because this is going to continue to be like this going forward until there's regulation. The prices are going to get higher and the rich are going to keep getting richer. And eventually something will change. And the rules will have to be reset. I don't know when or how or what exactly is going to happen there, but it can't keep going this way. But Gonzaga is going to continue to find ways to succeed. They always do. Folks, we're closing out the show with a couple mailbag questions that we didn't get to on Monday's show. Gonzaga has 7 neutral site games set for this upcoming season. Is that a trend that's going to continue? And are they really going to open the season against Baylor? We got answers to that and more coming up in just a second. First, folks, let's talk about FanDuel. I love sports. You love sports. We all love sports. That's what we're talking about them right now in the middle of August. But it's the dog days of summer, and they're not really sportsing like we want them to. However, FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all their customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. FanDuel right now has Gonzaga tied with both Baylor and North Carolina at plus 2,000 odds to take home the 2025 National Championship trophy. If you're feeling good about Mark Few and the Zags, think this is his year, head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, folks, closing out the show with a pair of mailbag questions. These both came from Jeff via Gmail. We didn't do mailbag on Monday, but we're doing it here on Tuesday. Jeff says, assuming the Gonzaga-Baylor game happens in Vegas, Gonzaga would have 7 neutral court games for the 24-25 season. While I'm thrilled to see so many awesome games on the schedule, why would Gonzaga play so many? Is it driven by what the net standings give for neutral court games? Is there something more to it? Could playing so many neutral court games over the first 2 months give Gonzaga an advantage come March 2025 when all the WCC tournament and NCAA tournament games are played on neutral courts? For the last part, I don't think it really matters all that much. Like it doesn't hurt to have played it in more neutral arenas, but I don't think it really drives their success in the WCC tournament or the NCAA tournament all that much. I think the net is the biggest factor, and I don't think it's a factor in terms of why Gonzaga chooses to play neutral site games. I think it's a factor in terms of why opposing teams don't play Gonzaga at home. Because there's no real motivation for teams to play Gonzaga at home when they could play them on a neutral site. What I mean by that is from the net perspective, if you lose to Gonzaga at home, their home, it's a quad one loss for you. If you lose to Gonzaga on a neutral court game, it's a quad one loss for you because of where Gonzaga ends up in the net rankings. If you beat Gonzaga on a neutral site, it's a quad one win for you. And obviously, if you beat Gonzaga at their home, it's a quad one win for you. But how many times does that happen, right? People don't beat Gonzaga in Spokane very often. San Diego State did it, and that was an anomaly. That's unusual that happened last year. Non-conference losses for Gonzaga at home at the McCarthy Athletic Center, extremely rare. Teams know this. So why would you go play them at their arena when you're more likely to take a loss, when you could play them at a neutral site where you're more likely to win, when the result for you is much better? And a quad one win is much better than a quad one loss, of course, but it doesn't, there's not extra incentive to play them at their arena. It's also smaller, it's louder, the environment is hard. So these teams they don't want to play Gonzaga there. We've known this for decades. Teams do not want to play Gonzaga in Spokane. John Calipari straight up said it. Anybody who wants to play in an arena that's smaller than 10,000 people wants us to lose. Hell yeah, we do, John. That's why we want you to come to our house. That's why we want you to play us in Spokane, because we want to beat you. Fine, we'll beat you at the arena, and we'll go beat you at your house, your former house, before you moved to Arkansas. But that's why we want people here, to beat them. Of course, that's the whole point. And that's why these teams don't do it. And for Mark Few, he has the option to either choose to not play these teams unless they're willing to come to his house, or play them on a neutral site. Because if he just chooses not to play those teams, then he just has a crappy schedule. And if you have a crappy schedule and a crappy WCC schedule, your margin for getting into the tournament and getting a higher seed is slim. Gonzaga has the best non-conference schedule in college basketball year in and year out because they're willing to play anybody anywhere. And that's the key part, anywhere. So that means that you play games in the Sanford Pentagon in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. That means you play games on an airplane hangar in San Diego. That means you play games at the Intuit Dome in Los Angeles, or basically every arena that exists in Las Vegas. Like, that's why you do that, because you got to get those games on your schedule, and that's the only way teams are willing to do it. Does it suck for Gonzaga? Yeah. Would they like to play more marquee games at home? I'm certain that they would, but this is just how it goes. This is how it goes. Final question of the show, another one from Jeff. He says, in the past 30 years, Gonzaga has played its first game of the season against a ranked team 4 times. 3 of those years happened around 25 years ago when Gonzaga was trying to build the program to national prominence. The 4th time was in 2020 when Gonzaga played Kansas, and that was because of COVID craziness. Since Gonzaga does not start seasons against ranked teams, how likely do you think it is that Gonzaga Baylor would actually be their first game? It seems more likely Gonzaga Baylor would be the second game on Thursday or Friday the 7th or 8th, and their first game would be on Monday or Tuesday against somebody like Idaho or North Dakota, or whatever bye game will fill that blank. Yeah, that's what I think is going to happen. That's what I think is going to happen here. Gonzaga's playing Arizona State on November 10th. We know that. That game is in the books. It is scheduled. It is confirmed by both of the staffs. That game is happening. We've heard rumors that Gonzaga is going to play Baylor in the first week of the season. We know Baylor's first scheduled game is on November 12th. So the odds are that I think Gonzaga and Baylor is going to be on either the 7th or the 8th. No, I think the 8th is pushing it. I don't think Gonzaga would want to play Baylor in Vegas on the 8th and then have to be back for the game against Arizona State on the 10th, but it could happen then. It could also happen on the Thursday, the 7th, and then Gonzaga, the season opens on the 4th. So Gonzaga, most years, they didn't last year, but most years they play on opening night. They play the first day of the season. So Gonzaga playing on the 4th, the 7th, and the 10th. It's 3 games in 6 days. That's a little unusual, but I think that's more likely than Gonzaga playing on the 7th or 8th against Baylor and having it be their first game of the year. But again, we haven't seen a schedule. Every day that goes by, more teams release their non-conference, so we know, hey, it's not them, it's not them, it's not them. But I don't know if Gonzaga is trying to find a game at the beginning of the year. I don't know if they're still trying to find a location in Vegas, which is why we don't know the date of the Baylor game. Maybe both those things are happening. Maybe they actually have answers to both those questions and they just haven't released it yet. I don't know. Obviously, when we do have information and answers there, we'll be able to have that conversation. But my guess is Gonzaga is not planning to play Baylor in the first game of the year, but it'd be kind of fun if they did. Mark Few loves this team. He trusts this team. You can tell by the non-conference schedule. He's happy to have the continuity. This is a year where you'd be willing to play a team like that in the first game of the season. But my guess is they're trying to get, as you said in the question, Jeff, they're probably trying to get an Idaho or a North Dakota or a Bakersfield or somebody like that to open up the season against. If they don't, if Baylor is the first game of the year, expect a exhibition game like a Lewis Clark State or Eastern Oregon or somebody like that right before the season opens, so that they kind of have that primer type contest. It just won't be an official game in the record book. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We'll be back with one more show later this week as we are in the off season here. We got 3 more next week, going all the way throughout September till we get into October. Craziness in the Kennel on October 5th, and then we are boom into the season previews, all that fun stuff. Thanks again, folks, for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.